First, we'll want to check under the engine to make sure there are no leaks or puddles. Be sure to check headlights are clear with no cracks and that they are the proper color. Be sure to repeat on the opposite side. Also, ensure that signals are firmly attached, not loose. Here's the coolant. Be sure to check the sight glass for the proper level, ensure the cap is tight, and check the lines for any leakage. The alternator is belt driven. Be sure the belt is tight, ensure that it's mounted securely, and check for any wires that are loose, cracked, or frayed. The water pump is gear driven. Be sure there are no missing or loose bolts, and be sure to check for leakage. Check to make sure the exhaust system is mounted securely and that it has no dents, holes, or leaks. Ensure the landing gear is fully raised with the handle securely stored and that there are no cracks, breaks, or missing parts. The air compressor is gear driven. Ensure it's mounted securely and that the lines are not leaking or loose. Use the dipstick directly in front of the air compressor to ensure the oil is at the proper level. Ensure that the power steering fluid is mounted securely, that the hoses have no cracks or leaks, and that the fluid is at the proper level. Ensure the steering box and hoses are mounted securely with no missing bolts, and check for any cracks or leaks in the hoses. Below and beside the box you will see the steering linkage. Make sure all of these components are mounted securely, are properly greased with no worn or loose joints, and no missing nuts, bolts, or cotter keys. Check that the springs are not shifted, cracked, or broken. And ensure that the U-bolts are not shifted, loose, or missing any nuts or bolts. Check that the shock absorber is mounted securely on both ends and is not dented or leaking any fluid. Directly underneath the steering box you'll see the spring mount. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or missing any nuts or bolts. Check that the brake hose is mounted securely on both ends with no cracks or leaks. The hose is fed into the brake chamber, which must also be securely mounted with no dents or leaks. Ensure that the push rod is not loose or bent and is not missing any parts. The slack adjuster must have no more than 1 inch of play. On the inside of the wheel, make sure the brake drum has no cracks, oil, or grease, and that linings are 1/4 inch minimum. On the tires, the tread depth must be 4/32 of an inch with no cuts or bulges, and the tires must be inflated to the manufacturer's specifications. Check the rim for any bends, cracks, or illegal welds. Ensure there are no loose or missing lug nuts and no shiny threads. Check the axle seal to ensure that it's filled to the proper level and that there are no leaks. Ensure the door opens and closes properly, that the rubber seal is in place, and that the hinges are intact. Ensure that the mirror brackets are not loose or damaged, and that the mirror glass is not cracked or broken. Confirm that the steps are securely mounted and not damaged or broken. Check that the fuel tank cap seal is tight, that the tank is securely mounted, and that there are no leaks underneath. Check the frame for any cracks, bends, or illegal welds. Check the drive shaft to ensure that it's not bent or cracked, and to ensure that the U-bolts are tight and secure. Test the header board to ensure it's securely mounted, and check for any cracks or holes. Also, ensure the duals are properly distanced and that there's nothing stuck in between them. Just as you did before, ensure the airline and brake chamber here are mounted securely with no cracks, dents, or leaks. Inside the cover, make sure the slack adjuster has no more than 1 inch of play and that the push rod is not bent, loose, or missing any parts. With the hanger, make sure the bracket is not cracked or broken and it's not missing any nuts or bolts. Ensure that the spring is not shifted, cracked, or broken, and that the U-bolt is not loose or missing any nuts or bolts. Check that the shock absorber is mounted securely and is not dented or leaking. Make sure the airbag is mounted securely and has no cuts or leaks. The rear tires must have a tread depth of 2/32 of an inch, properly inflated with no cuts or bulges. Check the rim for any bends, cracks, or illegal welds. Ensure there are no loose or missing lug nuts and check for any shiny threads. With the air and electric lines you see here, make sure all lines are attached firmly to the truck and the trailer, that there are no cuts, leaks, or any bare wires showing. This is our fifth wheel skid plate. Make sure there are no cracks or breaks, that it's properly greased and it tilts freely. Make sure the release arm is not bent or broken and it's in the lock position. And finally, make sure the platform has no cracks, bends, or illegal welds. Check that the splash guards are properly mounted with no rips or cuts, and that the lights and reflectors are not cracked or broken and are of the proper color. Ensure the leaf springs are not shifted, cracked, or broken, and ensure that the U-bolts are not shifted, loose, or missing. Make sure the spring mounts are not cracked, bent, or missing any nuts or bolts. With the tires, ensure the tread depth is 2/32 of an inch, there are no cuts or bulges, they are properly inflated, the duals are properly spaced, and there is nothing stuck in between them. Check the rim for any bends, cracks, or illegal welds. Check that the lug nuts are not loose or missing, and that there are no shiny threads, and also check that the axle seal is mounted securely, not leaking or missing any nuts or bolts. At the rear of the trailer, check that the mud flaps are properly attached with no rips or tears, and that the lights and turn signals are not cracked, broken, and that they are the proper color. Ensure the brake hoses are mounted securely with no cracks or leaks, and make sure the brake chamber is mounted securely, also with no dents or leaks. Check the push rod and slack adjuster to make sure the slack adjuster has no more than 1 inch of play and that the push rod is not bent, loose, or missing any hardware. And finally, the brake drum must have no oil, cracks, or grease, and the linings are 1/4 inch minimum. Once in the cab, check the seatbelt for any rips or frays and make sure it latches properly. Ensure the fire extinguisher is up to date and mounted securely. Also, make sure you have 3 safety triangles on hand. Lastly, make sure you have extra fuses available. Perform a safe start by starting the truck with the clutch in and the shifter in neutral. Next, check the light indicators to ensure they're working properly. The turn signals, the 4-way hazards, and finally, the high beams. Make sure the oil pressure is rising to the proper PSI and that the temperature gauge is at the proper level. Ensure the volt gauge is between 12 and 14 volts. Make sure the air pressure gauge is reflecting the proper level. Ensure the windshield wipers work properly, that the rubber is not ripped or frayed, and that the wiper fluid sprays. Check that the defroster and the regular air vents are working properly. Test the air and electric horns to make sure they're working properly. Examine the windshield for any cracks or chips and make sure there is good visibility. Check that the mirrors are mounted securely, adjusted properly, and clean. To begin the air brake test, ensure the air pressure is full and then turn the truck off. Then turn the key back into the on position. Release both brakes and then keep your foot on the brake pedal for 1 minute. You must not lose more than 4 pounds of pressure in that 1 minute. After that minute has elapsed, begin to pump the brake down. The low pressure alarm will go off at 60 psi. Continuing to pump the brake, the brakes must pop out at somewhere between 20 and 40 psi. Once this has happened, start the truck again. Time the air gauge from 85 to 100 psi. This must take no longer than 45 seconds. Put the truck in gear and then pull against one brake at a time to be sure they're holding properly. First, release the parking brake and pull against the trailer brake. Then, release the trailer brake and pull against the parking brake. Finally, release both brakes and put the truck in gear. Roll ahead at 5 miles per hour, push in the clutch, and remember to keep your hands off the wheel. Finally, push in the brake.